and they were big giant dudes, like the guy in Prometheus. Is that possible, man? Do you think that's possible?
I think that there definitely is something to be said that our ancestors were absolutely in communication with non-human intelligences. I don't think that in a number of cases it was physical presence, but definitely that they were in communication with something and that they could establish this link. It's like, it's not like some contact which, I should put this, an intermittent phone signal. It's a constant line. They can kind of like go to whatever, a statue or something in a temple, and this uplink, downlink thing works greatly. And there's also something to be said. All of these cultures across the world, they always say that the offspring of the gods somehow became the rulers. And that is definitely something which is another universal constant. And that, again, genetic memory is one of these things. It's been poo-ha-ha in the 19th century. The ideas of Carl Jung and all of these things have been pushed aside. But we have hundreds, thousands of primitive cultures elsewhere who basically say they can access this pool of information on a regulated basis. And, I am a firm believer that certain hallucinogenic substances really take you outside of this cardboard box, outside of this framework, and that they take you into a world of intelligences, and that our ancestors were given the tools and the techniques to basically establish this link. And once this link was established, they could pretty much ask these intelligences whatever they wanted. And then it was up to the intelligences, I guess, whether to say, yeah, we'll tell you this, or no, we won't tell you that. And I think that is, to a large extent, what our ancestors were saying about this link of the gods being present amongst them, that somehow they were able to sustain a presence. In a number of occasions, it seems to be specifically in kind of like what I would say the non-traditional societies, some of them which have escaped most attention, remote tribes in China, and things like that. There might have been a physical alien creature running around there for a while. But in most societies, specifically the famous ones, it somehow seems that these gods were non-human intelligences, not necessarily physical, but definitely present and somehow in communication with our ancestors. And how that went, very few people knew back then. And
do you think that's from psychedelics, that was the communication method for the non-physical entities?
I think it's definitely one possibility. I think it's something which we can go and say, this is how it could have happened.
It sounds so stupid to anybody who's never done mushrooms, but if you have, or if you've done
Joe, did you see that new study about mushrooms? How they're saying that what they thought happens when you do mushrooms is totally wrong. That your mushrooms,
it shuts off your brain. Like your whatever the mushroom's doing to you. It's almost like it flips your switch and goes
like
in,
DMT.
and it runs the show with mushroom. Well, what
That's weird.
Yeah, what mushrooms is very closely related to human neurochemistry. When you take a mushroom is like I forget the chemical way to describe it, but it's 4-phosphorolyl-oxy N-dimethyltryptamine. So I'm not saying it right, but it's N-dimethyltryptamine is a part of human neurochemistry. So this stuff, this psilocybin, is it's like human neurochemistry with a little added something to it. And when it hits you, it basically takes over the show.
It's crazy.
It's fucking really crazy.
That's even scarier.
Well, it is scary. The idea that McKenna always had was that it was an artificial intelligence, and that we were eating it, and that's how it was communicating with us, and that it came here from other planets.
Yeah.
That's why it's so different. Apparently, there's no other organism on this planet with the phosphorus in the 4 position. According to McKenna, I don't even know what that means, but like psilocybin, and he believed that it probably came here as spores on an asteroid, and that's why it has such an unbelievable impact. It's like when you have a mushroom experience, if you haven't had one before, it doesn't seem like it could ever be possible. You're like, there's no way. How did I not know that this was a possibility? To folks who haven't had psychedelic experiences, the idea that a psychedelic experience could somehow be otherworldly intelligence. Like I hear Richard Dawson, who I'm a huge fan of. I think he's a brilliant guy, and Richard Dawkins rather, and all his breaking down of fundamentalist religions I think is fantastic stuff. But then when I heard that the guy had never had a psychedelic experience, I'm like, my God, you have to know that there's so many books and so much work written on the connection, which the connection between what they call entheogens, or psychedelic substances, and higher states of consciousness, revelations, religious experiences. Like, why would you, as an intellectual, not want to experience that? It's not like you'd never come back, or it's not like it fucking, redlines your brain and sends you into a mental tree.
But I think it's because the definition of a psychedelic is that it's somehow drug. It puts you somewhere which isn't real, so it's of no interest to explore that. Why would you want to create? Why do you want to explore that stuff?
I think that is a very silly way of looking at reality. I think that the idea that we even understand what that's doing to you, all that means to me is you haven't done it. That's all it means to me. If you really feel like you have some concrete definition as to what's going on in that state, I most likely say you probably haven't done it before. Because if you have done it, you'd come back very humble about your opinions on what's going on there. It's too weird.
And that's what our ancestors are saying. They had this entire system of initiations, and what we're discovering is that through a series of fasting, sleep deprivation, psychedelic drugs, whatever it is, and all of it together combined, they basically pushed you out of your comfort zone, and it was the high level. You were going to experience your ancestors, you were going to experience the gods, you were going to really find out that you were not alone in the universe. And this is pretty much everything which our ancestors are saying. And like in the book, I say, at some point, relatively early on, 30,000, 25,000 years ago, we figured it out. We figured out that this cardboard box, the things which we see with our senses, is not everything there was to reality. We figured out that there was something larger there, and we began to speculate and think about as to why we were here. What was this? Why do we run around here? What is this thing in the mind? And then, they didn't have computers, they didn't have all of that stuff, but they were thinking about it, and they were experiment-based. And to a large extent, we're back to where we are, because right now you have, surgeons in hospital environments who are pushing little X's or little weird things on top of machinery where the patient will never see it. But when the patient says, like, hey, doctor, why is the little thing on top of this thing there? The doctor will kind of go like, how did you know? You had a near-death experience. He had an out-of-body experience. You somehow were able to pick this up through non-sensory means. And we're back there. But as a whole, again, jumping on my horse here, science isn't interested. Science basically says, like, it's nothing to do with this. It's religious. We're never going to look into these things. And what you have is this standoff or this stalemate or whatever situation we're in, whereby people hunger for information. Nobody who has the tools and to some extent the schooling to give us the answers is interested. And so at the other end of the spectrum, you have wild theories. You have the fact that the ancient Atlanteans must have had helicopters, machinery, and all of these things. And guess what? I actually don't care too much. I don't believe it, but I don't care too much that it's out there, because it seems somehow, Eric von Däniken had to say that the Nazca lines were a spaceport before a few scientists went to Peru and studied them and tried to preserve them. Before 0.001 was interested, and it was a lone woman, basically trying to convince the locals not to drive over in their trucks over the Nazca lines. She was the only one interested. Nobody else was. It took a guy to say, hey, maybe the gods have landed here. Maybe this is a spaceport, before they were pushed into action. And so, the fact that people are making up sometimes extremely wild claims might hopefully push these people, these scientists, off their butt into the field and do actually some kind of research.
Even to disprove things, just to do something on it.
Do something. And in the case of the Nazca lines, what they have been discovering since is so great. They have discovered pyramids. They have discovered that these people had a high civilization. There are even people out there who really began to realize that what was happening there had to be seen from the sky.
For folks who don't understand what the Nazca lines are, just fill them in, because some people might be ignorant to it.
Well, the Nazca lines are basically gigantic geoglyphs, some in the shape of monkeys or other animals. Quite often and mostly famous are the lines, which just crisscross. They have basically been made by sweeping off a top layer of surface of sand, and below it there's quite often a whiter surface. So they stay visible for hundreds of years because it's a desert condition. It hardly rains at all on that plateau. And, it's come to a point why people have said, okay, they have to be seen from the sky. And there are a few scientists out there who've actually seen that some of the rocks near some of the lines were exposed to extreme height. They also began to see that some people were actually buried with
extreme height, is that what you said, or heat?
Heat. There were also people who were buried with basically what we would describe as hang glider material. And so they're beginning to find out that these people took to the skies, and one of them has actually proposed that they had balloons, that this is why the hot air basically was encapsulated and they went to the sky. Other people, are pursuing things like kites. All of these things all of a sudden are becoming within the bailiwick of the potential. People are looking at this and see whether this is possible, whether they can find evidence around Nazca. And so, it took somebody to say, hey, this thing needs to be seen from the sky, before people are really beginning to say, oh yeah, there is something to this Nazca civilization. There were pyramids there. This is a not unimportant civilization which was there. This or no, we won't tell you that. And I think that is, to a large extent, what our ancestors were saying about this link of the gods being present amongst them, that somehow they were able to sustain a presence. In a number of occasions, it seems to be specifically in kind of like what I would say, the non-traditional societies, some of them which have escaped.
And they're big giant dudes. Like the guy in Prometheus. Is that possible, man? Do you think that's possible?
I think that there definitely is something to be said that our ancestors were absolutely in communication with non-human intelligences. I don't think that in a number of cases it was physical presence, but definitely that they were in communication with something and that they could establish this link. It's like, it's not like some universal constant. And that again, genetic memory is one of these things. It's been poo-ha-ha in the 19th century. The ideas of Carl Jung and all of these things have been pushed aside. But we have hundreds, thousands of primitive cultures elsewhere who basically say they can access this pool of information on a regulated basis. And, I am in contact, which I should put this, an intermittent phone signal. It's a constant line. They can kind of like go to whatever, a statue or something in a temple, and this uplink, downlink thing works greatly. And there's also something to be said. All of these cultures across the world, they always say that the offspring of the gods somehow became the rulers. And that is definitely something which is another a firm believer that certain hallucinogenic substances really take you outside of this cardboard box, outside of this framework, and that they take you into a world of intelligences, and that our ancestors were given the tools and the techniques to basically establish this link. And once this link was established, they could pretty much ask these intelligences whatever they wanted. And then it was up to the intelligences, I guess, whether to say, yeah, we'll tell you.